Welcome to the Longevity Decoded podcast, a thought-provoking journey into science and medicine with discussions on how to optimize your health by learning the cutting-edge tools to apply in your daily life, preventing illness and maximizing your health span. I'm your host, Dr. Guerrero. Hi, I'm Dr. Guerrero, a practicing pulmonary and critical care medical doctor. I had the privilege to study at Georgetown University and later further my studies at Harvard Medical School. Although my experiences at those institutions really gave me a lot of perspective on medicine and science, all the opinions and views on this podcast are entirely my own. Welcome to today's episode. Today's episode is a very special one because it gets to the crux of the aging problem. You really want to hear this one. After the episode, you're going to be able to understand how we age, why we age, and what can we do about it in terms of slowing aging, therefore improving your health, quality of life, overall health span, and also even reversing the clock, either slowing it down or all the way reversing it, which has been accomplished already. As always, I'll present scientific data, evidence-based medicine, scientific research information such as scientific publications in reputable journals, all the way from animal studies to human studies, and I will make it at the same time very easy for you to understand. So I will throw some terms that I just want you to be aware of, but I'll make sure that it at the end lands very clearly into your brain and your memory so you can recall it and even teach others about this. And just to give you a very brief overview of what we're going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about the main pathways. We have three main biochemical, biological pathways that are involved in aging. Now, it is more complex than just three pathways, but those are the three main pathways that we know about very clearly and have been able to intervene on effectively, and you can do something about it. And we're going to talk about specific supplements and specific actually prescription medications that can be used to reverse aging. The key ones you're going to hear about, I'll just give you some examples, will be the category of the NAD boosters. I'll explain more about that. And that includes NMN and NR, and in some cases just pure NAD. Metformin, that's a prescription medication. Rapamycin, that's a prescription medication. Spermidine, Quercetin, Berberine, and resveratrol. Now, I want to emphasize that nobody fully understands aging and how to reverse it completely. However, like I said before, we have already subjects that have been able to reverse their aging even by a decade or more, just by tweaking a couple of the pathways that we understand. And I think that's a huge result already. But obviously, myself and nobody else understands this completely. It's just the key pathways that you can alter, again, with lifestyle, supplements, or prescription medications. Now, I'm going to highlight specific practical applications or things that you can apply to your daily life right away. And I'm going to make it very clear when I say that so you can take note or remember, and that you know that it's a key point that I'm describing. I'm going to say this is the practical application for you. And those are the key take-home points for something that you can actually apply directly. Now, if you are listening to this on YouTube, I'm going to put in the description below the actual articles or all the scientific articles that back up what I'm saying, so you can go even deeper. And if you want to double check on things, specific doses, for example. So I'm going to put everything down there in the description. And also, specifically for YouTube, I'm going to timestamp specific sections. So if you want to jump straight into NAD boosters or straight into the metformin chapter, or just find specifically the practical applications that you could use, you can just look at the timestamps and just quickly jump to minute 47, for example, and then just save some time. So why do we age? Well, the key concept here to understand is that there's a basic law of the universe or physics. And that's the second law of thermodynamics, that by definition, nobody or nothing can escape it. And within that law of thermodynamics, there's the concept of entropy. Entropy is a measure of chaos. And what the law says, and that has shown in physics experiments, is that there's a tendency as time goes by for a higher entropy or a higher chaos or degree of disorder. And as things get disorderly, things start to have a lot of mistakes or errors within its design. So as time goes by, there's more entropy in your body, there's going to be more errors, and therefore that can lead to diseases, alterations in your immune system, and other factors that ultimately will lead to your death. Now, I'm going to name and very briefly explain all the causes of aging, all the things that we know that go wrong in your body, again, following that law of entropy that causes aging. And then I'm going to go and just delve deep into the ones that we can actually fix or treat. So one big one that you hear about is a problem with telomerase or your telomeres. Telomeres are the caps at the ends of the chromosomes. Remember, your chromosomes are the ones that carry all the DNA data in it. So as we age, those caps start to become shorter and shorter and shorter. And there's a correlation with that and aging. The other thing is the DNA itself. So DNA itself can get corrupted by mutations or alterations in the normal sequence. And that happens for various reasons. But as time goes by, there's a higher chance of errors, higher chance of mutations, and therefore aging. Now, those two, the telomeres, the DNA, we're working on it. There's some experimental things that they're doing in the lab. And at some point, we're going to be able to alter things like telomerase, one of the enzymes associated with the telomeres, and some of the also DNA repair enzymes. But at this point, that's something that you cannot actually do something about or buy a supplement or product to intervene on that right now. That's just only at the research level, and it's not definitive. There's also risks with developing cancer from trying to tinker with the DNA and the telomeres. So we're still really far away there, but they're making a lot of progress. Next on the list, we have senescent cells. What are senescent cells? That means older cells or old cells. How do we define an old cell? Very simple terms. It means a cell that's unable to readily divide or readily function as it should. So as these cells become older and older, they become a problem because they start secreting or producing different factors that actually age all the neighbor cells that are actually younger and healthy. So it's sort of like a way to contaminate the other cells. So we can tackle the number of senescent cells or diminish them. We can tackle the process of aging. So that's one of the ones that we are going to talk about and dig deeper, okay? Next on the list is abnormal metabolism. Abnormal metabolism includes things like obesity, diabetes, all the way to metabolic syndrome. So especially in the current world that we live in, where the average person is very comfortable, excessively eating, not exercising, for example, that will lead to obesity and diabetes and other metabolic problems. And we know that those accelerate your aging. That's another one that we can intervene mainly with lifestyle, but also supplements and prescription medications. Next on the list is a very basic and important one, sleep or lack of it. So the lack of sleep also has been correlated with aging and mutations in the DNA. Very specifically, lack of sleep has been linked to cancer because of these mutations in different specific sites of the DNA, which lead to cancers. So sleep is another, again, lack of sleep is another reason for aging. Next, we have a very important one, and this one you can do something about it, is a drop in your NAD levels, or nicotinamide adenosine dinucleotide levels. NAD, specifically NAD+, that's what they call in biochemistry, or some people call it the currency of the cells, because it's a molecule that interacts with almost any process in your cell as a coenzyme. It accelerates processes, and it has a very close link with the ultimate production of energy in the cell, mainly ATP. So essentially, we cannot live without NAD. And we know that as we age, especially as we cross age 30 to 40 roughly, there's a significant, massive drop on the NAD levels compared to a younger person. And this has been studied thoroughly, and we'll explain that one in a lot of detail here, but that one can be altered. And once you alter your NAD levels to a higher level, a younger level, you will increase your lifespan. Next off is the mTOR pathway. That's little m, capital T, capital O, capital R, mTOR. That means mechanistic target of rapamycin. Rapamycin is a medicine that we routinely use for anti-rejection for transplant. So for example, liver transplant, renal transplant, or kidney transplant. This medicine is used so your body doesn't reject the newly implanted organ. So rapamycin, interestingly, was discovered in the island of Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, that's near the Chilean country, and it actually belongs to Chile. They found behind these stones this microscopic organism that will produce this chemical that will basically downregulate that mTOR pathway, and that because it came from that island, they call it rapamycin, which again we use for rejection or prevention of rejection from transplantation. And the rapamycin, what it does, it lowers your mTOR levels. So what happens with your mTOR levels? What normally triggers it? Basically the presence of amino acids or protein. So the more amino acids or protein you take in, the mTOR pathway goes up. And in excess, if you take too many amino acids and proteins, the mTOR will go up. And that has been shown very clearly in all species, essentially, from worms to flies to mice to humans. It has been shown that when you upregulate it with excessive protein or amino acids, that the cells age much faster. So rapamycin is another medicine that we're going to talk about because it can downregulate your mTOR pathway. Another key factor is the AMPK system. That stands for adenosine monophosphate protein kinase. That's basically an enzyme that's an energy sensing enzyme, or it's in that system. And this one is one that you can actually tweak. Another important pathway at this point, this one we cannot directly intervene on. There's some research on that. Some people are doing it off-label, but it's not fully mainstream yet, and that will be stem cells. So as we age, we lose the amount of stem cells. So as you have less and less stem cells, you have less ability to, let's say, replace older cells. So that's another cause of aging, because we have less stem cells as we all age. And then abnormal levels of hormones. As we age, you start having drops in testosterone for men, drops of estrogen for female, and other hormones. Now, that was a lot. So let me tell you the key pathways that we can intervene on. And we're going to go one by one, talk about the supplements, prescribed medications, and lifestyle modifications that you can do to optimize those pathways and actually, factually, increase your health span and your overall health. So I'm just going to name them, and we'll go one by one. So the first pathway we're going to talk about is the NAD pathway. Remember, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. That's the currency of the cell, NAD+. So we're going to talk about NAD boosters, how to increase your levels. Again, they drop as you age, and we want to get them up. So that's the NAD. The next one is the AMPK pathway I talked about, adenosine monophosphate protein kinase pathway, and the mTOR, little m, capital T, capital O, capital R, mechanistic target of rapamycin. And ultimately, finally, the last one we can tweak will be the Scenescent Cells. I think those are the 4 key pathways that we can tweak. Probably the most potent ones that will have a stronger effect will be the NAD pathway, the AMPK pathway, and the mTOR pathway. So if you want to remember anything from this podcast episode, will be that there's 3 key pathways that you can modify, alter to live longer and healthier. And those are the NAD pathway, the AMPK pathway, and the mTOR pathway. So just remember those. Now, before we talk about each of the separate main pathways, we need to understand that different things in the environment, supplements, and prescription medications can alter these pathways. And that these pathways, again, the main three pathways, NAD, mTOR, and AMPK, they do communicate with each other. So when you tweak one of them, let's say you tweak the NAD system, it's going to send signals and collaborate, so to speak, with the AMPK and mTOR pathways. So for example, if you try doing some fasting, it's going to affect the NAD pathway, increasing NAD, for example. That's going to talk to the AMPK system, raising that, lowering mTOR as you have a lower protein intake. And the same thing with, for example, sleep, exercise, or taking a supplement, for example. Now, if you take an NAD booster. So it's very important to understand that each of these pathways communicate with one another, and affecting them with exercise, sleep, fasting, supplements, or prescription medications is going to alter a specific pathway, which in turn is going to affect the other pathways. So that's a general concept to understand. Now, we do not know exactly what's the prescription, how to tweak one pathway, and how much is that pathway affecting the other pathway, what's the best way to do it, exercise, fasting, that part is, nobody knows the perfect prescription. It's going to depend on your situation, what's more beneficial, your body composition, and other factors. But we're going to go into that and try to find specific practical applications of how to use different tools so you can use it for yourself in a very precise way in terms of what's your current health status. Now, let's start with the NAD pathway. This pathway is the one that I would say has the most research to back it up, both basic science and clinical research, both in animals and humans. So the history is interesting. This started a couple decades ago at MIT with the finding that very small organisms like yeast and worms, fruit flies, when tweaked in a specific way, mainly affecting the pathways related to a group of genes that encode a couple of proteins, which are enzymes, known as the Sirtuin genes, Sirtuins, Sirtuins, or Sirtuin genes, when they were modified either by fasting or revving up the NAD levels by either giving NAD or giving an accelerator of this NAD pathway, such as resveratrol, which we find in peel of grapes. They found that this NAD pathway will alter the longevity or the lifespan of these animals up to 30%. And it was very consistent throughout different species. So this started at MIT with Dr. Garant and Dr. Sinclair, who started experimenting with this and were the first ones to actually show that resveratrol will be a key compound that's known as a polyphenol, which causes hormesis. Again, that's the term. Hormesis means benign stress on the cell and basically activate those genes called the Sirtuin genes, which use as a fuel NAD, the nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. So again, just to make it clear, the Sirtuin genes are activated by a combination of two things, NAD and a polyphenol. That's what they found in the lab. So if you use a polyphenol like resveratrol, and you can get that like a supplement, usually 500 milligrams up to 1,000. Some people even do 2,000 milligrams. And then you take NAD, nicotinamine adenine dinucleotide booster. So we're going to talk about different compounds there that will boost those levels. If you take that combination, as was shown in MIT, that's going to rev up your Sirtuin genes, which is going to lead to a cascade of benign metabolic pathways, ultimately and objectively increasing the lifespan of the animal. And then all that research progressed, was taken to the lab, and was tried in mice, and it showed again a substantial, at least 30% increase in lifespan in bigger animals. And what they found is that those animals when they have a higher overall exposure to the polyphenol and higher NAD levels, they just live longer. So this is how important this pathway is. It's actually having an effect on the genome, altering the expression of some of the genes. And in this case, the Sirtuin families, there's 7 types of Sirtuins. That's too nuanced to get into in this podcast, but essentially increasing the expression of Sirtuins via an NAD booster and a polyphenol like resveratrol. You can also use something called pterostilbene, and that's another compound in the peel of blueberries. That's gonna increase those levels and increase the lifespan. They've extended the research further into humans, and they've shown that with some specific compounds that are promoters of NAD, or precursors will be a better term, precursors. Those precursors basically increase the NAD level, and in humans, we've shown higher NAD levels, which we know it correlates with increased lifespan. Now, understand that we don't have a long-term study in humans showing that they live longer, because we haven't had enough time to do that, because it takes a lifetime essentially, so it's not feasible. However, the metabolism of smaller animals, especially like mice, for example, it is extremely similar to humans. So it's at a different scale, because most mice, in the lab, they can live a year and a half or 2 at most. So it's very different to the lifespan of a human, but we know how to convert that length of lifespan to a human type of lifespan. And again, the biology of a mouse is very, very comparable to a human. That's why they use these animals in the lab, because it's very replicable. Yes, you have to prove it ultimately in a clinical trial, but the findings at a microscopic level in the cell, and also looking at the animals, it's just dramatic. For example, there's an experiment that was done utilizing a promoter, which is the first one we're going to talk about, known as NMN. Okay, nicotinamide mononucleotide. That's a precursor to NAD. And when they use this molecule, they put mice on the treadmill. They load them up with NMN. Again, not M&Ms. That's different. I don't recommend that on a daily basis at least. But the NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide, they put a group of mice on that compound, and the other group was the control, and they had them exercise on a treadmill. And they showed first that the mice taking the NMN had a massive, almost doubling increase in the NAD levels. And to make it more exciting, they got mice that were 600 days old. So they're pretty old, maybe like a 70-year-old human. That's when you make the analogy and conversion. And the mice in the treadmill that took the NMN compared to the control mice, which were also older, but they were not taking any supplementation, they just run much faster incessantly. So the regular control mouse will just stop the treadmill after a couple minutes. The other mice just kept on going, double the time, and actually in one case, that mice was so energetic that he actually broke the treadmill. So that's how potent this is. It's something real that it does make a change. So how do we get more NAD? Your body will use vitamin B3 to build NAD, but it's not a single step. So you have to convert. Your body will take the vitamin B3, so you take that orally. Then your body is going to convert that by a different biochemical pathways from vitamin B3 to NR, nicotinamide riboside. That molecule is much bigger, and then that molecule can actually readily enter into the cell, and then inside the cell, it is further modified and actually enlarged to become the much bigger molecule known as nicotinamide mononucleotide. Then that molecule, it's a little bit bigger molecule, okay? Then that molecule has another modification where a phosphorus is added, and the NMN is converted into NAD, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, and that's the energy currency of the cell. So they've tried different things, and there's different experiments that people have done in the lab and in humans, trying mainly NR and NMN for complex biochemical reasons. If you take vitamin B3, it is very costly in terms of energy needed to convert that vitamin B3 to NAD, and the steps are very complex, and it seems to be very inefficient. It could be related to absorption issues. It could be related to energy expense in the cell. But basically, if you take vitamin B3, you're not going to get a boost of NAD. It's insufficient. So what they found in the lab, that if you use either one is okay. There's some polarization here. There's an NR camp in the scientific community, and then we have an NMN camp. So there's two group of scientists that focus on different ones, and what I find in the literature is that either one of them raise your NAD levels with great efficiency. Okay, this becomes very nuanced. Which one's better? Which one has a more efficient transporter to get from outside the cell to into the cell? And there's different discussions. Some people allege that, or basically they're proponents that you should take NMN because it's the step right before the NAD. Some other components, more of like perhaps Dr. Garant scamp, that's my impression at least. I'm sorry if I'm wrong. Basically, Dr. Garante basically says that probably taking the NR, who has a more efficient transporter to get into the cell, will be a smarter move. It's also a smaller molecule, so we'll get into the cell faster than the NMN. And Dr. Sinclair will tell you that NMN is better. But when you look at all those studies, they're both pretty darn good. You're going to raise your NAD levels with both of them, and probably at a rate of, taking a basic dose. We'll get into the doses. You can probably double your NAD levels in about 10 days based on the studies, which is incredible. Just understand that after age 30 or so, your NAD levels start to plummet dramatically, and that's going to result in lower energy, lower efficiency, and you start aging at that point. So it is important to raise those levels, get the cells to a more youthful state. So going back to what we were talking about, again, vitamin B3, then you get NR, then NMN, and then NAD. And this is something I want to talk about as well, that the NAD molecule is pretty large. So we're seeing this boom of clinics in Florida and California mainly, where they're offering this infusion of intravenous NAD. Okay, so let's say they're promoting it as the pure, you get the pure NAD intravenously. Now, they haven't studied this formally, but we know that that molecule is pretty big, and that the molecule will struggle to get into the cell. So it is honestly not clear if that's going to translate in a high level, and is it really worth it getting all that NAD intravenously, more invasively. We are not sure, or at least the scientific community is not sure if that really works. It hasn't been shown. Because again, the NAD molecule is pretty big, struggles to get into the cell. You need the NAD in the cell, not circulating in the blood. You want it inside the cells, and it struggles to get into the cells. Okay, so it might be a matter of a dose. If you take a massive dose, maybe some of it will get in, but it just seemed not very cost effective to get a massive dose, get it intravenously. You have to go to a center to get it. It could be a 30-minute infusion, whatever it is, could be an hour infusion, versus just taking a little pill that we know it's getting absorbed, taking NMN and NR. Okay, so for that first pathway, again, it affects the Sirtuin family of genes, increases longevity. The NAD is the gas, and then basically, or the fuel, and then the pedal, if you do an analogy with the car, as best first described by Dr. David Sinclair, by using resveratrol, a polyphenol, or pterostilbene, it's going to increase that pathway and will lead to increased lifespan, overall on average 30%, which is a lot. And that's data from animals, from tiny little microscopic organisms like yeast, all the way to mice in terms of proving the longevity effect of that 30% lifespan increase. And in humans, it's an extrapolation or correlation with the other animals. And we've proven that the levels of NAD are key in improving the lifespan, which has been proven in humans. So that has been absolutely shown in human beings. What we don't have is a long-term study because we haven't had enough time, but at some point that data is going to come out. If you're watching this on YouTube, or if you go to my YouTube, I'm going to put in the description or in the show captions all the articles related to the NR and NMN molecules and how those molecules affect the NAD levels and the longevity in biology. So if you want to go deeper and look at each article, again, they're going to be posted in YouTube there, and you can have access to that if you want to read those and learn even more about this. Now, how to take the supplements, where to get the supplements, this part is important. Here's a practical application of how to use this. Well, first thing, let's get this out of the way. Unfortunately, right now, the FDA is looking at an actual pharmaceutical company, which I believe is a company of David Sinclair's, or he's involved with, where they are submitting a medication, which is actually either NMN, I'm not completely sure exactly, but it's NMN or a derivative of NMN, but it's got something with the NMN molecule that the FDA is looking at to see if they can approve it as a molecule for anti-aging or to increase longevity. And because of this, because this NMN is becoming now a pharmaceutical, it's not legal to sell it as a supplement. So currently, I'm sure you can find somebody that can sell it, but it's supposed to be illegal, at least in the United States, by the FDA, to sell NMN. So, that's something that, it makes sense to me, that it makes it very clear that is a very powerful compound. If they're banning it for supplement production and they're looking at it as a medication, that usually means that it's very potent and has a real effect. It's not placebo. So unfortunately, right now, October 2023, you cannot purchase NMN. Again, maybe you find it somewhere on a website, but in some strange website, but you're not going to find it on Amazon, things like that. So the only one that you can take right now is NR, nicotinamide riboside. That one's legal, readily available, has been shown to increase the NAD levels and longevity in animals. So that one you can get. The dosing for that, based on the studies, it varies. It goes from 250 milligrams up to a gram a day. And how to take this? You should take it with the accelerator. Remember, this NAD molecule is like the gas, and then the pedal for the gas, for the accelerator, will be a polyphenol like resveratrol or pterostilbene. So what you can take is the NR, nicotinamide riboside, 250 milligrams to a gram a day. Again, that's going to give you energy. So I would take it in the morning or early afternoon, just in case you get too much energy. 250 to a gram, you can try different doses. And mix that with a separate supplement. Some companies have the same supplement in the same bottle. Most of them is a separate supplement. You get resveratrol and take a gram a day, or pterostilbene and take about 500 milligrams to a gram a day. Take them at the same time, and there's some increased absorption of this if you take it with something that's a little bit has some fat. So it could be a little bit of either yogurt, for example, will be a nice way to take it in. Although some people have shown that the NR, it's pretty easily readily absorbable. So I don't think it's a huge problem if you just take it with water, but there seems to be an additional advantage if you take it with something like yogurt or a little something with fat. Small amount just to help the absorption. So it could be a big spoon of yogurt and then take the NR and the resveratrol. Again, I recommend in the morning or early afternoon, just in case you get too much energy. Most beneficial for most people, given the usual routine of daily life, which is during the daytime. Starting in the morning will be to take it in the morning. It could be with breakfast or just take it with a little yogurt. So that's the NAD pathway, and the main booster available right now is only NR, And as a summary, again, to recap, there's a lot of clinics opening up in Florida and California promoting this intravenous NAD. From my standpoint, it's not worth it. There's no evidence that that works, and there is evidence that the NAD molecule is pretty large and does not readily cross the membrane into the cell, so you might be potentially wasting your time and your money. Much cheaper to just get a supplement with NR, nicotinamide riboside again, and take that with a polyphenol like resveratrol or pterostilbene in the morning every day. In about 10 days, you should be doubling the NAD levels and triggering that pathway. The next molecule, which is, I don't know if I should qualify it like this, but it might be the second best one in terms of data that we have from biochemistry, biology, and hard science. But we do have a lot of clinical indirect data in humans, which is superior to the NAD from that standpoint, because it's more of a human data. And the pathway is the AMPK system I was talking about, okay? That adenosine monophosphate kinase system. That system is another pathway that will trigger increased health span, meaning being alive longer and healthier. And that pathway, when revved up, leads to those results. So what affects that? Again, fasting, exercise, all those things affect that. But one of the things that we want to be able to achieve here is consistency. How do we alter this pathway? So it could be through fasting, it could be through a supplement, for example. And again, all these three pathways communicate with each other. But in terms of the AMPK pathway, you want to rev it up. How do you increase that? So you can increase that with metformin. That's the fastest way to do it, more efficient way to do it. And it's something you can replicate, because the problem that we're having with the fasting is that most people cannot keep up with it. It is not easy, and it's very tempting and easy to get calories from everywhere. And in many cases, you can get cheap calories fast. So it is really hard to force yourself to fast consistently. And I still encourage doing fasting probably intermittently instead of prolonged fasting all the time. That's a very complex issue. We can get into that in another episode. I would argue that it'll be more consistent to be able to take something orally, like a supplement or medication, and rev up the AMPK levels instead of you having to fast, okay? Because you're not going to be able to push through the fast consistently. So what can be taken to rev up the AMPK? The best molecule that we have right now for that is actually metformin, Metformin, and that's a medicine that you've heard before, most likely for diabetes. So that's prescribed to diabetics, usually type 2 diabetics. And that molecule has been studied in diabetics, and there's been multiple studies, including a huge study that was done, and we'll put a reference for the study below if you're watching this on YouTube, or you can go get it there. I'm going to put it on my website as well if you want to go there, Jorge, Jorge, Guerrero, Guerrero, MD.com, and you can get those articles as well. But basically the metformin, this huge study, they showed the benefit in terms of glucose control and improvement in diabetes. But when they were looking at that data, they found an all-cause mortality improvement overall to all the patients. So basically, it did not only help with the diabetes, but it increased the health span. So people were healthier when they were taking metformin. So they found incidentally that metformin increases the health span. And currently, they're doing studies stemming out of New York, trying to just do a targeted study just to see if metformin, not in diabetics, just for all comers, if you put them on metformin, do they actually live longer? So that's being studied, but from that big study, it had thousands of patients. And there was an incidental finding of increased health span, lower incidence of cancer, lower incidence of cardiovascular disease. So metformin is a potential longevity molecule. So here's a practical application for you. And the practical application will be to take the metformin either once or twice a day, about 500 milligrams will be a starting dose twice a day. So 500 milligrams in the morning, 500 milligrams in the evening. The rate of severe hypoglycemia with this is very low, so it's very safe overall. The only tricky thing would be first, make sure you don't suffer from recurrent hypoglycemia. Make sure you go check with your doctor. Make sure there's nothing else like interaction with other medications and that you're okay and safe to take that. And if that's the case, then you have to be able to, at this point, convince or almost convince your doctor to give you that. Because if you're not a diabetic, that's not a on-label prescription. That'll be an off-label, out-of-the-box use of this. So that might be a struggle to find a doctor that will prescribe that. But if you show them the data, you can bring the articles that, again, you can find on the description below and on my website. And you can show it to your doctor, and, a doctor that's really interested in helping you, they will read the literature and get back to you and likely either do it or refer you to somebody else that would prescribe the metformin. But that's another actual prescription medication that if you want to be very aggressive in terms of your health span and altering this AMPK pathway, that's something you can consider. Now let's talk about the final pathway, the mTOR pathway, mechanistic target of rapamycin. This is the very interesting one that they found this molecule in Easter Island near the coast of Chile. They found this organism that was producing this, and in the Rapa Nui Island, that's the other name for that island, and therefore this compound was called rapamycin. Rapamycin is currently used routinely for transplant rejection or anti-rejection medicine. So when somebody has a liver, kidney transplant, etc., they're put on rapamycin amongst other medications to suppress the immune system and decrease the chance of your body rejecting the transplanted organ or the new organ that was put in you. So this medication is known to downregulate the mTOR pathway. When that gets downregulated, they've shown in animals an increase in lifespan. The cells get healthier, the organism lives longer. Now, going more back to the basics, why do we have this mTOR pathway? So you have this biological pathway for what? Basically, this pathway, what it's sensing is a low amino acid and low protein content in the cell. So if you have a lower amount of protein intake or amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins, this pathway is therefore triggered. And we know that this pathway, if triggered a lot by, for example, constantly taking a lot of amino acids and proteins, is going to rev up that pathway and age you. So it's sort of a paradoxical thing. Protein is good, but if you take too much and you keep that mTOR pathway revved up, that's going to lead to aging. And conversely, if you down-regulate or blunt that mTOR pathway, for example, by taking in less amino acids and less protein, or taking something like rapamycin, that leads to a longer lifespan. I don't want to confuse you with this. We're talking about biology, biochemistry, and yes, if, for example, you want to build muscle and you're doing resistance training, etc., you want to take enough protein to build that up. And that's where we think it's going to get very confusing for people, because they understand they need to take protein to build muscle, but now I'm saying that the protein will age you. So both statements are correct. So how to fix that? So I think we're going to end up with some sort of a model based out of taking a medication or supplement in order to modulate those pathways. We don't know if that's going to work, but we think that, or at least I think, and some other scientists and doctors, that perhaps allowing you to take the protein you need to take to build up the muscle while taking a medication that can downregulate that pathway could have a net result of muscle growth while conserving and maximizing your health span or longevity. Now, you might wonder, how's that mTOR pathway making you live longer and improving your health? Well, the main mechanism is by autophagy. What's autophagy? It's basically the process where your cell gets rid of organelles. There are little components inside of your cell called organelles or little organs, and basically cleanse those old parts or remove them and then create new parts. That's called autophagy. So when the mTOR pathway is triggered, in essence, what it does, it says to the cell in the body, again, remember, given a lack of amino acids and lack of protein, that gets down-regulated, and that's going to put the body in a scavenge mode, where it basically tells your body, you need to scavenge for protein. We do not have enough. Let's recycle some of the old defective organelles or microscopic structures inside of the cell in order to get some protein out of that, because there's insufficient protein from the external world. So that's what happens, for example, when you're decreasing your protein intake or fasting. At that moment, essentially, the mTOR pathway will get downregulated, trigger autophagy, and therefore cleansing the parts of the cell that are not working well, removing, let's call it, to make it very simple, crappy parts of your cells could actually degenerate in the future and cause bugginess and problems in cell function, potentially lead to something like cancer. So the autophagy process will remove some of those old components of the cells, cleansing the whole system. So that's how the longevity effect is derived from downregulation of the mTOR pathway. And again, this can be triggered by taking less amino acids, less proteins, or taking something like rapamycin. Let me just be very clear. This rapamycin medicine is real. It works. That's why it's used for transplant medicine. So it is a very strong medication. Do not take rapamycin, okay? At this point, we do not know what will be a very low dose, safe dose in terms of longevity, purely longevity, without significantly affecting your immune system. It will affect your immune system, okay? And there's people taking very tiny little doses of rapamycin off-label. They're doing studies on this. Hang in there. It's going to happen. But at this point, do not take the rapamycin. It is a very strong immunosuppressant. You can end up with a weird infection, and you may even die from it. So I'm giving you more theoretical education about this, so you know that that's coming. They're going to find the right dose for that, or a medication that's slightly tweaked, that doesn't cause too much immunosuppression, that it focuses more on the autophagy part of things. At this point, the only thing you can do to rev down the mTOR pathway will be essentially diminishing your amino acid and protein intake for that specific purpose. Now, the next molecule, which is now available as a supplement, is Spermidine. Sperm, I-D-I-N-E, Spermidine. This was discovered back in the 1600s by Anton van Leeuwenhoek, which was one of the fathers of microscopy science. And essentially, the first thing that he did, he was looking at everything, studying everything, and he found that there's something called sperm, and there's spermatozoa, and then they see this little thing swimming under the microscope, along with some little crystals that he calls spermidine. First, everyone thought he was completely nuts. How can there be any little creatures moving around in that liquid called sperm? And they thought he was completely crazy. But even back then, he found the sperm themselves, and also these little crystals called spermidine. Subsequently, the same crystals were found in wheat germ and soy, and this compound was called spermidine. They've studied this thoroughly in animals, in multiple animals, increasing the lifespan of all the animals. And in mice, there's actually studies showing increased or improved cardiovascular health. And like in the study of Schwartz et al. In 2018, there's evidence that it also increases the memory. So there's a neurological benefit, a substantial, clear benefit. When they put mice on 1 gram a day of spermidine, they really had a significant improvement in memory. So spermidine is something else that could be used for cardiovascular health, memory, and overall increased longevity. The exact mechanisms are being investigated, but it is definitely showing that there is an objective benefit, at least thus far at this point in mice. The next longevity molecule is berberine. That's Berberine, berberine. So this molecule is very interesting because it has a chemical structure, molecular structure, very similar to metformin. So if you get stuck with the problem of being able to get the metformin molecule, let's say you cannot find any doctor that would prescribe, again, that's only a prescription medicine, metformin, you could take a supplement known as berberine. It's a natural supplement, and you can find that in the bark and roots of vegetables. And if you take about 1 gram or 2 grams, as they've done in the other experiments in animals, and there's some small human clinical trials, essentially this medicine, what it does is the same effect on the AMPK pathway, ultimately leading to metformin-like effects where you have increased insulin sensitivity, which is good to lower your sugar, and diminished glucose levels in your bloodstream. And berberine has been tried in multiple animals, and there's extensive experiments in mice leading to increase in overall lifespan. So animals, and they've tried this from worms, fruit flies, and mice, and they're doing trials in humans. It extends the lifespan. So animals live longer, are healthier, and more specifically trigger this AMPK pathway, revving up the pathway, increasing insulin sensitivity and overall glucose levels. So again, if you want to work on that AMPK pathway and you cannot get a hold of metformin, you can buy some berberine. Now, the last 2 molecules I'm going to talk about, they target the senescent cells. Remember, the senescent cells are the older cells. They have a lot of errors. They have defective components to them, and some have described them as zombie cells. So the zombie cells are just linger around the body, having these crappy components to them, unfortunately secreting or producing all these chemicals are really inflammatory or pro-inflammatory and pro-carcinogenic, so they can cause cancer. And they're just affecting the neighboring cells, which are younger and healthier. So if you get rid of those old cells, you're going to get rid of all those inflammatory and pro-carcinogenic markers. And getting rid of the senescent cells could be beneficial. This yet has to be proven in humans, but it has been proven in animals in terms of extending health span and lifespan, from fruit flies again all the way to mice, and the mice data is pretty strong. The 2 chemicals are fisetin and quercetin. So both fisetin and quercetin, they're basically found in apples, grapes, strawberries, broccoli, and kale. How much to take of each one? So you can take the vegetables. It's going to be hard to quantify how much you're getting. Now, in terms of how much to take via a supplement, and this information is derived from all the studies, we'll be taking fisetin 1 gram to 2 grams a day. Probably 1 gram is enough. To the higher end will be the 2 grams. And quercetin taking 500 milligrams a day. Again, fisetin 1 to 2 grams a day. Quercetin 500 milligrams a day. Again, the effect for this will be to diminish the amount of senescent cells. Now, there's an interesting study came out in 2018 from the Mayo Clinic where they looked at a combination of quercetin as a senolytic, that's the term for a medication that can, or supplement that can control or downregulate the senescent cells. So in the Mayo Clinic, they use quercetin combined with dasatinib, which is a tyrosine kinase inhibitor, which is a medication for leukemia. And the combination of this medication that was used on participants in a pilot study looking at patients with diabetes and renal insufficiency or kidney problems, they showed significant control of the senescent cells with decrease in the inflammatory markers. And there was a dramatic effect in the decrease in the senescent cells. Now, this is very interesting. Hopefully it pans out at the end. This was in humans, not in mice. The only issue that right now, the only molecule you can take and find as a supplement is quercetin. The dasatinib is only FDA approved for leukemia, so we're a little bit far away from taking that as a senolytic, but there's promising data in humans that quercetin is in that equation along with dasatinib to diminish your senescent cells, therefore improving the overall environment to your normal, healthier cells. Now, how do you know if any of this is working on you? So the only way to know if you want to try any of this supplements or medications will be to get a baseline biological clock assessment of your epigenome. In simpler terms, get a biological clock like a Horvath clock or a Levine clock. You can purchase those online. I'll put the links below in my YouTube channel and under this video if you're watching this on YouTube. Otherwise, you can go to my website and you'll find those there. But you can get a baseline read on your biological age. That's how old you are based on the number of methylations, or let's call it errors or scratches on your epigenome. That's going to tell you how old you are. Then you can start taking this medications. I would say probably wait 6 months at least, and then get another check on the biological clock and see if you're changing in terms of the speed of aging. Is it changing? Now, you'll get a more clear answer if you take this for like 2 years and then check the clock. But you might want to get a shorter, maybe 6 month clock just to get an idea. If you're very diligent with this supplements, you can make an assessment. And again, to be clear, it's not just supplements. It will be things like exercising, fasting, sleeping well, and then all the supplements. So you might be wondering, what do I take? Okay, I'm going to tell you what I take. And just remember that this depends on each individual. It's not the same for everyone. It's going to depend on your routine, how much you fast, how much you don't fast. I do fasting a couple times a week. At this point, I'm doing 3 times a week of intermittent fasting without eating, about 12 to 16 hours, not very extreme. But essentially, in terms of supplements, what I'm taking in the morning 1 gram or 1,000 milligrams of nicotinamide riboside, that's the NR, combined with 1 gram of resveratrol. Okay, resveratrol, that's the one that you get in the from the peels of grapes, but I get the supplement, 1 gram of resveratrol. And then I add trans-pterostilbene, which is found in the peel of blueberries. I take 250 to 500 milligrams of that. I also take in the morning 1 gram of spermidine, 1 gram of Fisetin, and 500 milligrams of Quercetin. I also take 1 gram of Berberine. And with that combination, okay, very focused on this longevity molecules, I'm targeting the NAD pathway and the AMPK pathway. Some days I take a low amount of protein to try to downregulate the mTOR pathway, but that's more limited, and I'm not willing to take rapamycin at this point because I do a lot of fasting. I'm not willing to take the metformin right now, although I could potentially, and I'm considering taking that in my days where I'm not fasting at all. That could be beneficial. We'll keep you posted. But that's my routine. Again, that should not be your routine. It'll give you a general idea. You should check with your doctor and make sure it doesn't affect any other medications and that it's not deleterious. For example, in the case of metformin, for somebody that has recurrent severe hypoglycemic events that are symptomatic. Again, low sugar level problems. That will be complicated and not recommended to take metformin in that case. Now, has this worked for anyone? Okay, I'm yet to check my biological clock. After being in a consistent regimen, I've changed my routine so much. I haven't been able to get into a consistent routine to be able to check a Horvath or Levine clock and tell, actually factually if it's working or not. But there's been reports anecdotally from different people that actually are targeting these pathways, and they've been able to actually reverse their age. In other words, let's say they're chronologically 35 years old, and when they check the Horvath or Levine clock, instead of saying that they're 35, which they're actually 35, the clock is saying that based on their epigenome, and that's part of what's the reader of the DNA, it says that they're, for example, 25. There's some cases of people going back and reversing aging 10 to 12 years. But these people are very diligent. They're consistently taking this. They're eating healthy. They're sleeping well. And it is a combination of factors. But this dramatic age reversal of a decade has been documented in individuals that are targeting these pathways aggressively. So there's some anecdotal evidence that this work. Again, we don't have robust randomized prospective control trials for all this, but that's all we have right now. It's your choice to see if you want to try any of those things that clearly work in the lab in mice, and there's some small human clinical trials. It might be worth a shot. Also, a lot of this supplements that I talked about today, all of them except for rapamycin essentially have a very low side effect profile. I would say maybe rapamycin and metformin, they can have some side effects. The rest of them, quercetin, spermidine, fisetin, all the NAD boosters, all those things, resveratrol, pterostilbene, have very low side effects. Animals don't get sick with that, and in human trials, side effects are very non-specific and not worse than any placebo. So they're very safe to take. From my point of view, I would say why not take it if the side effects are almost zero and there's objective evidence of benefit. So see which ones you're most interested in. Maybe you can try to start adding them one at a time and try to get a baseline biological clock so you can measure it later on, potentially 6 months or so, and see if there's any control or slowing the age process, or maybe diminishing the age potentially. You might get a very robust result. You can try that and then continue to track your health. I hope you learned a lot today. This is a very complex subject, and the take-home points again are that there are 3 main pathways that you can tinker with, that objectively speaking, scientifically speaking, based on animal and human studies, that these pathways can actually alter your health span or lifespan and longevity. And those are the NAD pathway, AMPK pathway, and the mTOR pathway. So try to take those supplements and always combine that with excellent sleep, a good exercise regimen in general, and eating healthy in general. Again, I'm sorry, I'm not getting into all the details of the sleep and the diet on this episode, but I'm trying to just drive the point that you need an overall healthy lifestyle in order to maximize the effect of the supplements. So give it a try and let me know. If you're finding this podcast of value to you, if you're learning something, if you think it's helpful, or at least you're acquiring new knowledge and you like that and you want to see more of this, please consider supporting the podcast. This comes at zero cost to you. Subscribing, following, putting a positive review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify will be tremendously helpful for the ongoing production of podcasts for you. Thanks for joining me here today, and I hope to see you here back soon on the next episode of the Longevity Decoded podcast. Thanks.